Welcome to the Voluntary Exchange Podcast. I'm back. I was going to do an episode today on the conflict in Yemen and how this is a United States war. I did research for about a week, which is something I never do. I do research, but not for these, which is why they've been so terrible in the past, and I've taken, 6 months to a year off between them because I just can't. I'm not really good at this. But you know what? I felt compelled after the not so recent now after the events of last night, but the recent U.S. bombing in Mosul, actually, in Iraq, that killed, 300 civilians. That's confirmed and not denied by the United States government, and nobody seemed to give a shit. So I decided, let's find the worst situation in the world that the United States is involved in, and let's talk about it. And I just want to kind of lay out the history of Yemen, not the country. I mean, a little bit about the country, maybe about 5 to 10 minutes about the country, and just how the country has become, and I'm quoting here, the poorest country on earth, where, 40,000 children die before their 5th birthday, and how the United States, yes, that's Obama's United States government, has been complicit in it from the beginning, has pushed for it, and in Obama's own words, in an interview that he did with the Atlantic magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg interviewed him. You can look that up online, where he said, the reason we're allowing the Saudis to, kind of just carpet bomb the entire country at will, target civilians and civilian infrastructure, is because we made a deal with Iran, and it kind of upset the Saudis. So we kind of have to, do something for them. The government of Saudi Arabia, which may or may not have helped finance the 9/11 attackers, which killed, Americans, which would be treason in my book. Maybe not technically treason, but I don't know what else would you want to call it. Like the closest thing to treason in the world, but treason. But what are we talking about? We're splitting hairs. So, I could jump into the elephant in the room. Donald Trump's just mindless, just 48-hour, 180-degree turn in Syria. With the missile strike last night, 50 missiles. I don't even need to tell you guys. 50 missiles dropped in Syria on Syrian government facilities, airstrips, in retaliation to a chemical weapons attack, which has not been proven by anybody. The only evidence that I've seen has been what CNN and MSNBC and Fox and the State Department and the military has been saying, which is pretty much that they saw a couple videos online. They saw some dead children. They saw some people with white helmets carrying dead children, and that means Assad did it, and there's no time to lose. In the words of Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, which I saw Scott Horton tweet out about an hour ago, there's no excuse for the targeting of children, which, coming from that man, is a disgusting joke. I really don't want to get into that, but what I want to kind of explain and my frustration with last night, other than you could just see it coming, and if you follow the situation the way that I follow the situation, and you kind of look at geopolitics the way I do, which most people don't because they're not losers who spend all their free time and their hobbies are going down deep rabbit holes of geopolitical movements and theories and policies and behind-the-scenes deals. But Syria is a targeted country. It's been targeted by the establishment of not just America but Europe and the elite power structure. It was on the radar of the Likud party in Israel since 1996. because of its connections to Iran and Russia. But more recently, there was the pipeline. They took a shot at putting a pipeline through Syria to go through Turkey into Europe to bypass Russia. That fell through. But there was that. And then just to show that this is not about children dying in a chemical weapons attack. This is about the Roman Empire of 2016 or 2017, the United States government and its allies, its international allies, in Europe, but really the special interests that back these places, these countries and these governments now, the banks and just large corporate interests, and these international think tanks like the CFR, the Council for Foreign Relations, and just these unelected people who decide that they're just the royalty that's going to run the world, without pretty much us deciding on it. As we could see from last night, nobody voted on this strike, and the media just goes along with it because they're so happy that finally the strikes took place, because they couldn't get Obama to do it, which is probably one of the only things that I applaud him for. So to get back on track, the way that they sell these wars to us, while at the same time doing in a country maybe 1,000 miles away, maybe less, exactly what they say Assad is doing, makes them ever more monstrous. So a little backstory, some history on on Yemen, and bear with me because my notes are all over the place. Yemen, if you don't know where it is, if you look at Saudi Arabia on a map, it's the big peninsula. The bottom of that peninsula is actually two countries. All the way on the left, you have Yemen, and then right next to it, you have Oman, which nothing really happens in. Probably, that's where they clean their money, and God knows what horrible deals are made there. But Yemen is, before any of this took place, was one of the poorest countries on earth. The country is, of course, mostly Muslim. It's probably 100% Muslim in religion, Arab in descent. It's very important strategically. If you look at it on a map, it's the gateway to the Red Sea. Across the Red Sea, you have Somalia, which ironically is another destroyed country, which we need to fight the terrorists in. The north part of Yemen, really the northwest part of Yemen, is Shiite, which is the Muslim offshoot that is prominent in Iran and over in Lebanon. It's really an offshoot of Shia Islam called, and I'm going to butcher every one of these names, so you're going to have to look them up yourself. I'm going to go Zadiism. Let's call it Zadiism. Yes, I think it's Zadiism. I believe it's, it's an extremist backwater, Stone-aged religion, much like the south part of the country, which is Sunni. The south part of the country, which is Sunni, does make the south part of the country more of an ally to Saudi Arabia, which is the big dick of the world in that area, and has pretty much just installed a puppet there for God knows. I have the dates here. We'll get to them. Before World War I, which was a little sidetrack, the anniversary of the United States' entrance into World War I was yesterday. So it's kind of funny how Trump's trying to start World War III on its anniversary. So during World War I, or prior to World War I, prior to the end of World War I, Yemen was actually controlled by the Ottomans, much like the rest of that area. But even back then, and this is going to be key, the northern tribes were never really under their control. So they were always the more of the the Bedouin tribal rural backcountry. They would be the south of the Arkansas of Yemen, you could say. Maybe not in intellect and the way that they see themselves, or we see them being in the Northeast as I live now. But just, you're not coming and getting me. Just very self-sufficient and independent. Ironically, after World War II, they were a Soviet ally. Now we're going to move up to the 2000s and just give you a little bit of some recent history. The northern tribes, and of course, like I said, the northern tribes in the South were always fighting. And since 1978, leading up to 2000, the South was controlled by, of course, one man, because it's not like they have democratic elections over there. His name was Saleh. He was the president until the recent 2009, Arab Spring, and that's kind of where this all popped off. So you had the northern tribes in the 2000s skirmishing and fighting Saleh for their independence under a man named Houthi. That was his leader's name, and the group that now you'll see in the news, the Houthis, took his name as their brand name, you could say. Ironically, which is just comical, to kind of quell the northern tribes, what initially was the plan from the South and Saudi Arabia was to export a jailed extremist from Saudi Arabia, which is, if you look into Saudi Arabia at all, you do see that they kind of export all their extremists, which, Osama bin Laden is the most famous. His real goals always stemmed back to the U.S. support for the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia, as they saw the House of Saud as, sellouts, as they are, if you really think about it, to their own people. So any extremists that pop up, the terrorists like Osama bin Laden or ISIS or Al-Qaeda, these extreme Muslim Islamists that are ironically trained and cultivated in Saudi Arabia are usually exported once they realize that, so my government is not even really supporting my extreme views that they told me were correct. So the extremists were exported to the northern part of Yemen even back then in the early 2000s to try to stir up some destabilization and move the government up to see if they could take over. Again, Saleh was in control since 1978. In the 2000s, he turned his policy to the north in a scorched earth policy. If you need to get any background, or this is you want to kind of have a reference point, if you've ever seen the movie Rules of Engagement with Tommy Lee Jones and I think it was Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson. That takes place in Yemen. It's sold as, the Americans are coming in and the crazy, angry Yemenis are attacking the embassy. And why do they hate us? Or, why do they, our freedoms are so bad. But in reality, we're just backing the dictator that's been running the country for 78 years. Not 78 years. I'm sorry. I'm talking way too fast. Since 1978. So, you could see even back then, the empire, as I call it, and many others do, was in full effect in Yemen, backing the wrong side, not giving a rat's ass about the people who live there, unlike what Anderson Cooper is telling me right now on CNN about the poor children in Syria. Moving ahead to 2009, because, of course, in 2000 and that whole kind of decade, Iraq was the center of attention for the U.S., so really the internal struggles of Saleh and his northern tribes really just were skirmishes. In 2009, you see the big dick of the world, as I mentioned again. Saudi Arabia gets involved. They announced that they're going to start up some Air Force and troop movements on the side of the Sunni majority of the South. They were afraid of losing influence over the government because, in 2009 you had the Arab Spring, and you started to see something happen in Yemen, which was a little interesting for the region. You have the dictator, which is a Sunni, start to even pull away from his master, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. So they needed to get in there and make sure that he remembered who who was in charge. He didn't attack them directly, but just kind of showing up, with your U.S.-made jets, kind of reminds everybody who's really in charge. Now, the oil regions of Yemen are the north, the northwest, and, actually the southwest part of Saudi Arabia has oil. Also, I think the southeast area of Saudi Arabia, near Bahrain, which is really just a military base that they made a country, but it's really just American military base, is a Shiite stronghold. So they're afraid that if they don't go in and make sure that they quell the Sunni uprising, the Shiite uprising in Yemen, the Shiite minority in Saudi Arabia might be getting some ideas in these oil-producing regions that they have, and the Saudi Arabians can't have that. I mean, it all makes rational sense from a geopolitical and you're trying to a domination aspect. 2009, we're stuck at. Let's see what the United States was doing. I broke this up into two parts. They run parallel: the history of Yemen and the conflict, and how the U.S. influence within those years kind of continually push it forward, which is my point, and how it wraps into how Syria has pretty much become, in the last 6 years, the way it is now, and to deny that the United States and the West got it this way is just being you just have your head in the sand. There's really no way around that. You're choosing not to pay attention. So if you go back to 2009 in America, you'll remember a small little story about the Panty Bomber. I don't know if anybody remembers the Panty Bomber. He had, a bomb in his pants. It didn't go off, but guess where he was from? He was from Yemen. So, all of a sudden, Yemen's important. Obama's in charge now. Bush tried to do his Iraq thing, failed miserably. But we got to get in there in Yemen and fight the war on terror. So we start backing that government. We call Saleh up on the phone and we say, listen, Saleh, we got the war on terror. We're fighting it. We need you to be our guy over there in Yemen. Make sure these crazy Al-Qaeda don't get in, these crazy Al-Qaeda people don't start, getting into your country and taking over, which ironically they do. They call themselves Al-Qaeda on the Arab Peninsula, or AQAP, as you might see them in the news today. They show up right on cue for the United States to start getting involved. 2009, again, you see, of course, any new, not ally, but any new front in the war on terror comes with a great big weapons deal. So it starts small with only $70 million in aid to the government of Saleh in Yemen. What else we got? Sorry. Oh yeah, Iran. 2009. How does Fox News sell Yemen to the American people? Well, of course, remember, there's Shiites in the north, and the Shiites are trying to take over the country. At this point they really weren't, but they did, as if you look at the present day. So of course that means the Houthis of the north are dubbed pawns of Iran in the media. And then you have the interesting new caveat that the Saudis were afraid of: southern secession. So even in the south, which was the Sunni area, you have within that, you have a secession movement away from the puppet government, where maybe nationalists want more of a Yemeni first regime in charge. So the government there, of course, targets that and dubs that's the Al-Qaeda portion of its Yemeni population. So you have the southern government of Saleh fighting the Houthis from the north, and also internally fighting Al-Qaeda, but really exporting that fight to the United States. And this is where you'll start seeing the drone campaign begin at the beginning of 2010. Beginning in 2010, also, this is where it's Yemen's actually dubbed the poorest country on earth. So as of 2010, it's not 2017, remind you, 2010, poorest country on earth. Here's some quick statistics. We'll get back into some more later. Out of the poorest countries on earth prior to 2010, it was 154th out of 187. 1 out of 5 people went hungry. 1 out of 3 people was unemployed. And 40,000 children died before they were 5 years old. And the country's running out of water. That's more of a recent stat. But that's the situation that we're really dealing with in Yemen. And nobody gives a flying fuck in the news. So, yeah. Okay, 2010. This is where the United States really kicks it into gear. The U.S. drone program. This is Obama's, baby. The drone program. In 2010, maybe not alone, but since it began, leading up to maybe to the end of 2016, these stats might be a little outdated. You have 113 to 144 drone strikes, 42 Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula killed, and civilian deaths unknown by one source. I have other sources that we'll get into that might actually shed some light on how many civilians have actually been killed in the country. Let's see if I have a number. Let's find a number real quick. Here we go. As I'll read this in full. This is from a very lengthy, great article by Patrick Coburn. You might want to read. I don't have the title in front of me, but you can just search Patrick Coburn, Yemen. I mean, he's right now he's actually reporting live from Mosul, Iraq. So that's kind of where he's at in terms of credibility. So here's the quote, and this is 2016. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but this was bound to happen. As of February 2016, the Saudis noted that the coalition had flown more than 46,000 flights over Yemen. By July of 2016, 69 strikes were studied in detail by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and had killed 913 civilians at least. So this is just Saudis. Maybe I should say this for later. Okay. So in terms of drones and how many civilians are killed, of course, at the same time that the United States really doesn't want to admit that they're doing a drone program, Obama, brags about it at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So I really don't have numbers. Let's see. Let's move on to 2011. Of course, 2011, the drones do not stop. They only pick up. And in terms of what's happening internally with politics in the country, this is the big year. 2011 is when the Houthi revolution begins. So now that small band of Shiites in the north begin to move south, not even begin. They call for the resignation of Saleh, and they get into and move into the south, beginning to take northern and western parts of the country and controlling them, much like ISIS has done in Iraq and Syria. There is an election in 2012. Saleh, of course, pretends that he is going to have democratic election to quell the disagreements between the factions. It's a single candidate election, and he wins with 99% of the vote. Again, in 2011, let's not forget what's going on with America. The drones actually just pick up after the Houthi revolt, because with the Houthi revolt happening in the north, you have chaos in the country. When you have chaos in the country, that's where Al-Qaeda does its best work. Same thing happened in Iraq, car bombs, sectarian violence. They really, will target anybody that they see as a Shiite, but also a Sunni sellout, much like the way they see the Saudi royal family. This is where the Muslim cleric Anwar al-Awlaki became famous, the U.S. citizen that was targeted in a drone strike by Obama in Yemen without charges levied against him. The argument was, of course, that he was supporting terrorism. You can go on YouTube and watch his speeches now, where he does talk about the evils of America and how we need to violence can be seen as the solution to the infidel problem. But he does change tune later on. I'm not defending the man. I'm just saying he's a U.S. citizen, and it sets a terrible precedent to have the president decide that he has a kill list, and you're on it, and here comes a drone. Boom, you're dead. This is where Rand Paul was made his first big famous filibuster, where he filibustered the drone program in America and asked Obama if, he would ever use that power to bomb an American citizen in the United States, which it took him about 3 days to get an answer, which should have took 5 minutes. So moving back into the drone program in Yemen, this was the first attempt at Anwar al-Awlaki, early 2011. They failed, and when I say they, I'm not talking about the military with congressional, sign-off for this war in Yemen. No, this is a secret, not so secret because of such journalists as Jeremy Scahill in his movie Dirty Wars. He also wrote a book. I would check into that if you've never seen it. The documentary is excellent, and you'll hear some familiar names that have now risen in the ranks in the military and are now in the Trump campaign. The Trump White House administration and in other branches of government. This drone program was not run by the Air Force or the Army or anything. No, it was secretly run by the CIA. So the CIA, which kind of runs its own operation anyway, now has a drone program where it can target Al-Qaeda at will. If you're a fan of Homeland, you know that this was going on. It's kind of the beginning of the show. You have the CIA doing drone programs and drone attacks on, wedding parties, and the aftermath of those civilian attacks. It all comes to blowback, as my hero used to say. This is where the CIA was allowed, and this shows the United States just dominance over these countries and the joke that these countries are actually independent entities and, they're on even ground with the United States. This is where a joint base was built with the blessing of the Yemeni army and the Yemeni government. A joint CIA drone base is built in Yemen, where 35 drone attacks were carried out in 2 months, in August of 2011 and September of 2011. 35 U.S. airstrikes. So we kind of just plop down a base and we just start blowing people up. We're doing that in Africa now. Maybe I'll get into that at a later date. September 30th, 2011 is when they finally get Anwar al-Awlaki, the American citizen, and they also get another American citizen, Samir Khan. Khan was an editor of the magazine Inspire. So you have 2 U.S. citizens murdered without trials. That was on the news for a little bit. It was poo-pooed by everybody. Even MSNBC just kind of went, oh, well, he's a terrorist. So, Obama said he was a terrorist, so we could just kill him. And even if you agree with that statement, I'd like for you to kind of rationalize the next drone attack that we had. Not even a month later, half a month later, when his 17-year-old son and 8 others were droned to death at a birthday party. His son, who was not a terrorist, but was a fighting age male, and that's quotes, fighting age male, which is pretty much anybody who's a Muslim between the age of 13 and like 50 is a fighting age male. So if you're a male and you may or may not want to kill somebody because your dad or brother or sister or mother or cousin or grandfather, goat, dog was murdered indiscriminately by a flying robot missile machine, the United States can just kill you, even if you're an American citizen. So his 17-year-old son is killed. You can even go on YouTube and you can see, I forget who said it, some U.S. official was asked about that attack, and his response was very coldly, he should have had a better father. So these are the people that are selling you on the Syrian war. Understand that. These are the people that think that you are dumb enough to believe that they care about you. Okay? Moving on to 2012. We have that 99% of the Yemenis voting for Saleh. He still steps down because he knows that his time is up, and he hands over the reins to his second in command. This guy's name is Hadi, H-A-D-I, much like Egypt. They just pass the reins down a peg, but nothing really changes. So Hadi, of course, is backed by the United States and the Saudis, and this is where tensions really amp up. This is where you see the Houthis really go, you know what? I think we're going to have to go and take some shit over. In terms of the drone campaign, it continues through 2012 and 2013. Support for the Hadi regime is really amped up compared to what it was for the Saleh regime, because of course you see the Houthis making progress, so you have to back up your ally a lot more. So getting back to the history, no, I'm sorry, we'll go back to the drones. Let's go back to the drones. Okay, 2012 December, Amnesty International releases a report. Between 2011 and 2012, the United States, the Yemeni government, and the Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula, stats come out on how many people they've killed. So I have that article here, not the actual report, which you can find online, but I have an article from the website antiwar.com written by John Glazer in late December 2012, where he speaks about the report and the stats within. In terms of the Yemeni government, they were generously supported by the United States, and we helped install the new government of Hadi after the fake election, which, you hear the jokes about how Russia influenced our election, but we had no influence in a 99% election for a dictator and his military commander. The government forces of Yemen used airstrikes, tanks, artillery, mortars to drive Al-Qaeda out of certain areas. So you have the government fighting Al-Qaeda and killing civilians in the process. You have these attacks taking place in residential areas where the bombs are dropped indiscriminately and disproportionately, resulting in the death of civilians. In some instances, airstrikes hit civilian homes, needlessly killing and injuring civilians, apparently because of a failure to take necessary precautions, such as verifying that the target was, in fact, a military objective. The authorities also obstructed access to medical care and subjected suspected fighters to enforced disappearance. So in other words, they just decided if you were Al-Qaeda, you don't deserve to live. No proof is brought. You don't go to trial. That's how they do things in Yemen. An example of they have a couple examples of actual drone attacks. That's what they are. Drone strikes, drone attacks, whatever the hell you want to call them. Carried out by your government, the United States. On I'll read one. Why not? In the morning of May 15th, in the morning of May 15th, 2012, an airstrike killed one civilian in his home in a village called Jahar. This was followed by another strike that killed at least 13 civilians who had gathered in front of the destroyed house. This is a tactic that you can read about in the news. I think they're called roundabouts or second flybys. I can't think of the name right now. But yeah, we bomb something, and then when everybody else gathers to check out what happened, we come back and we kill them all again. You can actually see it in the video that made WikiLeaks famous, Collateral Murder, where United States helicopter pilots with night vision murder a couple people on the ground, and when journalists and ambulances show up, they murder them as well. They were never tried, and Bradley/Chelsea Manning was arrested and put in solitary confinement for leaking that evidence to the American people. Getting back to this murder strike in May of 2012, a 33-year-old was killed in the initial airstrike that leveled his house. Residents and relatives of his who spoke to Amnesty were surprised that his house was targeted because they said he had nothing to do with Ansar al-Shahar, which I believe just translates into Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula. While some residents said that a house behind his was rented to the terrorist group and that possibly the aircraft missed its target, his brother Anwar insisted that the houses behind them were occupied by the usual neighbors and that the nearest houses rented by Al-Qaeda were between 100 to 300 meters away next to a mosque. Witnesses who spoke to Amnesty International gave consistent testimony about the airstrike that destroyed the home. And here's where the blowback comes in. If you want to wonder why they hate us, it's not for our freedoms. Some people were angered by the killing of the civilian and blamed Al-Qaeda, and an argument developed. Meanwhile, more residents gathered to see the destroyed house and ask what happened. The aircraft returned and bombed and fired into the crowd. At least 12 men and 1 woman were killed instantly or died from their injuries. Quoting one of the residents, "Our lives are valueless in the eyes of our own government, and this is why civilians are being killed without a crime." This is the UN speaking about the President Obama's drone program. It is alleged that since President Obama took office, at least 50 civilians were killed in follow-up, that's what they call them, follow-up airstrikes, when they had gone to help victims, and more than 20 civilians have also been attacked in deliberate strikes on funerals and mourners. UN Special Rapporteur on Summary Executions, Christoph Heinz, has described such attacks, if they have proven to have happened, as war crimes. And the person being quoted here, Emerson from the UN, let's get his full name, Ben Emerson, another UN rapporteur, would endorse the view that, yeah, if this is true, this is a war crime. And this is why when people like me have been calling Obama a war criminal for his 8 years in office, and people rolled their eyes, I have a point. He signed off on these strikes where a village is targeted and then targeted again, so he can go fuck himself, along with the people who don't understand that is just a war crime. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to be calm here because I'm trying to relay information, but at this point, with what's happened in the last couple of days, it's really hard for me to, keep it straight. Where were we? 2012? Yes, follow-up airstrikes. Good times, right? Let's move on. No, actually, let's go backwards. Just in case you need it, Dirty Wars comes out in 2013 if you need to use it, but Google's an amazing place. I'm sure it'll get you where you need to be. Going back to 2011, where I stated the Houthi revolution began, and you started to see more and more U.S. involvement, the drones pick up. the aid picked up also. Okay, now the aid wasn't sent directly to Yemen because they're a small country. Their government sucks. They don't know how to handle, F-15s and cluster bombs, which are, illegal. But we didn't sign that treaty, so the United States doesn't need to follow on that. But the Saudis, they have money, they got oil, so they can buy as much weapons as we can sell them. So that sweet lady Hillary Clinton that everybody told me I needed to vote for to stop Donald Trump. She was Secretary of State back then, 2011. I don't know if anybody remembers. Kind of one of the reasons that I didn't vote for her. She's a blood-soaked, war criminal. This is where the support for the Saudis really kicks up, and it's really Hillary, along with Libya, which took place during this time, really is the one who goes out there and really starts getting the Saudis to, kind of lean on Yemen more and more. There's a new king in Saudi Arabia at this time. His name's Salman, whatever. And he's more interested in Saudi expansionism than his predecessors, who were really just trying to control what they had. He wants to expand the influence, not just export terrorism, but actually expand. So he wants to make sure Yemen's under their control, and this is where you'll see, ISIS being funded and beginning to show up. And this is where we have, what we have today in Syria, which is, fully backed by the Saudi Arabian government, the rebels, the head-chopping rebels that may or may not be doing the chemical attacks. So you have Hillary deciding that, this new king needs some new toys. So on Christmas Eve, no less, she signs an arms deal with the Saudis on behalf of Boeing in the amount of $29.4 billion. This included 80 F-15s, which will be used in the Saudi air raids over Yemen in the coming years, and 1,300 cluster bombs, which are banned by international law under the Convention of Cluster Munitions. This is signed by 100 nations, two of which are not the United States and Saudi Arabia. So there you go. The United States is the beacon of light on the hill with the fucking dove. Cluster bombs are okay though, because we got to make some money. Previous to that, don't forget, the Saudi government had donated $10 million to the Clinton Foundation. So, we have that. See, this is all coming together. These are the reasons that I just don't understand why people supported her or saw her as a better alternative to Donald Trump, who, as we've seen, is just doing what she would have done. So why vote for the lady with the blood on her hands already when you can vote for the guy who doesn't have the blood on his hands yet? I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. We're going to jump ahead to 2014. Back in Yemen, the United States kind of sits back now. They've done their thing. They got their drone program, which is really just kind of a money-making operation where the CIA is the hammer and they need a nail. So they keep finding nails and dropping bombs, and they really don't care about the blowback or if it's even succeeding in its goals of stopping Al Qaeda. But in Yemen, those Houthis, those wild and crazy Houthis, are making their way south. And in September of 2014, they get to the capital. The capital of Yemen is Sana'a, S-A-N-A', Sana'a. It's a port city, of course, where the oil imports come in, along with the food and the water, because I think about 80% of Yemenis' food is imported, which is important, as you'll see, moving forward. So, September, they take the capital city. In January of 2015, they take the presidential palace, and they set up what they call the Revolutionary Committee. Hadi is kicked out of the presidential palace. Of course, this signifies the Saudi involvement, boots on the ground. They can't have this. They can't have a Shiite rebel group taking over the capital of their neighbor. So they get involved. And of course, the U.S. gets involved and starts really amping up the fear in America because, this means Iran is running the show in Yemen because Iran equals the Houthis because the Shiites are in both countries. There's really been no connection in terms of funding from Iran to the Houthis that has been confirmed by anybody other than maybe like John McCain. But that doesn't matter. Bill O'Reilly says it at 8 o'clock, and it's fact, and that's really all that matters. Because the Saudis are involved now in 2015, the U.S. will get involved in terms of ratcheting up the aid. But before that happens, let's go through the first few months of 2015, and when it really gets interesting in Yemen. You have January, they take the palace, the Houthis. In February, Hadi actually escapes to another port city, Aden, spelled A-D-E-N, declares it the new capital, and sets up kind of like a government in exile. So right now, at this point, you have a very weird, multi-front war going on. You have the Hadis. You have Hadi, the president, the government of Yemen. You have the Saudis. You have Al Qaeda, and you have the U.S. all on one side, fighting the Houthis and Iran. But you also have the United States also running around chasing Al Qaeda in a cat and mouse game that never will end. But at the same time, they need Al Qaeda to fight the Houthis for them. So, kind of how we do it in Syria and Iraq. We're chasing Al Qaeda, but we don't really want to catch them too much because we need them to destabilize these countries because we don't like their leaders. It's kind of how we do business now. It's all treason, and everybody should be in jail. And as far as I'm concerned, we move on to March. Hadi doesn't stay in Aden too long. He's forced out, and he actually gets on a boat or a plane, probably a plane, and he heads for Riyadh, and he's living directly in Saudi Arabia, proving to everybody that he was literally a puppet of the Saudi Arabians. This is where the second stage of the Saudi-U.S. involvement really kicks up, and then other Arab states get involved. They have a meeting in Riyadh. You have Hadi there. You get the UAE. You get the Saudis together. You get Egypt together. You get Oman, maybe. I don't think they really do anything. Qatar, for sure, gets involved. Turkey, because you can't have Yemen fall under the control of Shiites or anybody. You need to have control over that country. You definitely can't have that country run by its own people. That's not allowed. You cannot have that happen. So, you got to get in there and really stomp down on the people of Yemen, make sure that they know that they're allowed to live, but only at our expense. Back to 2015. Throughout the year, the United States budget for aid goes up, and in November, the month of November only, we spend about we sell about $1.3 billion in arms to the Saudis to keep their air war going. In terms of what you were selling, I'm going to read a little bit more from Patrick Coburn. This is where the cluster bombs really come into play. There was a bomb dropped by a Saudi-flown U.S.-made F-15, and here's a little bit of a segment from his article where he breaks down what was found at the scene of that attack. Metal fragments retrieved from the scene were revealed to be from U.S.-manufactured GBU-31 satellite-guided bombs, 1,000 of which were included in a $1.29 billion weapons sale to the Saudis in November of 2015. This is where Coburn asks a senior deputy official at the State Department if there was was ever any consideration of refusing such deals to the Saudi Arabians, which he responds by suggesting that by supplying the highest tech precision weapons we can, we were essentially doing the humanitarian thing. Quote, if you want the Saudis to be able to limit collateral damage, then it's not particularly useful not to give them the weapons that would be most effective in doing that. I mean, that statement alone should be enough for you to get in the street. So your State Department saying, well, they're going to kill them anyway, so we might as well give them the best bombs to do it. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's not like we can stop funding the dictatorship of the Saudi Arabian government. I mean, what are you, crazy? We need them. I mean, it's something that needs to happen. We can't go without them. It's insane to think that. Oh God. So towards the end of 2015, the Saudis step up the second stage of their involvement with a blockade. So now you're going to blockade this poor country, literal poor country. Okay. And included in things that the Saudis begin bombing, because they're running out of military targets at this point at the end of 2015. This is just becoming target practice for a lot of these royal princes that get into the Air Force in Saudi Arabia because they have nothing else to do. They're never going to be king. They're never going to get any real jobs. So they join the army, they join the Air Force, and they fly these missions, and they think, we'll just kill some Yemenis. Who really gives a fuck? The United States surely doesn't. So the things they begin bombing include warehouses, factories, power plants, ports, hospitals, water tanks, gas stations, bridges, donkey carts, ancient monuments. In terms of the blockade, you have a blockade on food, fuel, medicine. At this point, the Yemenis are relying up to for 90% of their imports of all of these things. 90%, so only 10% doesn't need to be imported. All of that's being imported, mostly by boats. I mean, it's not coming over land through the desert of Saudi Arabia at this point. Yeah. So we're going to read a little bit more Patrick Coburn. Here he speaks about the actual strikes and how they just have become, by the end of 2015 and 16. So now we jumped ahead to 2016, but you have to understand that throughout the end of 2015 and the entire year of 2016, this is what's been taking place. The Houthis are fighting on the ground against the government, and overhead, the Saudis are just bombing everything they see. Okay? They're bombing civilian infrastructure. This is a slaughter. This has nothing. This is not a war. I wouldn't even define this as a war. This is just a slaughter exercise that the U.S. is complacent in. Okay? Your government is complacent in this. So, again, from the Patrick Coburn article, I'm quoting here. For hundreds or thousands of strikes, there was less excuse or none at all. In mid-April of 2015, for example, there appears to have been a concerted attempt to destroy all the gas stations in the capital, which were already being heavily attacked. Thanks to the blockade, fuel was scarce, and drivers would spend hours or days waiting in line to fill up. That was how at least 5 people died and 23 were injured on April 15th. The number of victims is actually unclear, since so many were burned beyond recognition. Several weeks later, on May 8th, the coalition declared that the entire 4,000 square mile governance of the 4,000 square mile, the city of Sana'a was now a military target and therefore open to indiscriminate bombing. So they just decided anything in the capital's military target, have at it, do what you need to do to get it done. We don't give a fuck. Great, right? Good times. Good times. Moving ahead to the end of 2016, I guess we could talk about more aid if you want, but that's really it. I really just want to get to 2017 and where we're at now. You have Trump. He's given $1.5 billion to really amp up the Saudis in Yemen again and really kind of fuck up the humanitarian crisis even more. At this point, Al-Qaeda actually controls areas of the country in the southeast, which is really off the reservation. It's really not a populated area. But, they're Al-Qaeda. We should be getting them. But, they just kind of sit there and do their thing. Also, at this point, 2017, that blockade I spoke about, which you might consider, a crime in itself, you have U.S. Navy ships included in that blockade because that narrative that this is actually just Iran taking over the country has really taken full effect. So now we have that excuse that we can go in there and do what we need to do to stop Iran. You're moving into 2017, and recently you see the maybe a couple days after Trump took office, what was it, 2 weeks? You see the U.S. Navy SEAL raid that killed a 7-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old girl, who was also the daughter of Anwar al-Awlaki, because we haven't killed enough people in his family. We decided we needed to kill his 7-year-old daughter. Of course, we all know that raid didn't produce any actual intelligence of any kind. The target that he was looking for, Mr. Trump, got away. He actually made a videotape or an audio tape about a week later, kind of laughing in our faces, just kind of, sticking it to America, letting us know that we're just as useless as we've been for the last 15 years. That's really it. I'm going to close with just some more disgusting facts about Yemen, just to really let it sink in. I'm coming up on an hour, so that's really going to be enough. But go online, take a look at Yemen. You can shoot me a message if you want some sources. I can go and get some for you. Get some. I would read the Patrick Coburn article, so I'll try to get that link and stick it up on the website, along with the link to this actual recording. So I'll kind of have a little bit of a show notes link page there with some of the documentation that I provided today. We have 82% of the population is in need of humanitarian assistance at this time. And I guess I'll end with, and then I'll wrap up with another quote from the Coburn article. Just breaking down a report by Human Rights Watch about these Saudi airstrikes. Okay, crowded markets appear to have had a particular attraction to the targeters. Human Rights Watch documenting a dozen such attacks across northern Yemen, including 5 in Sada alone. On May 12th, for example, 3 bombs 5 minutes apart hit a market in the Houthi-controlled town of Zabid, killing at least 60 civilians. Another attack killed 65 on July 4th. In the deadliest market attack to date on March 15th, 2016, 2 bombs in the village of Mastabada killed at least 97 people, including 25 children. Many of the victims died as they fled the scene of the first strike, only to be hit by the second, a notable example of the double tap technique frequently employed during the campaign. And here's a quote from somebody on the ground. When the first strike came, the world was full of blood, says Mohammed, a cleaner at the market, he's telling a researcher at Human Rights Watch. People were all in pieces, he says. Their limbs were everywhere. People went flying. Most of the people we collected in pieces. We had to put them in plastic bags. A leg, an arm, a head. There wasn't much more than 5 minutes between the first and second strike. The second strike was there at the entrance to the market. The people were taking the injured out and hitting, and it hit the wounded and killed them. So, I mean, in terms of notes, that's all I have. Now, that example is not the United States. I'm not going to put that on the drone operators. That's the Saudis. These are the people that we just sell arms to indiscriminately and let them fly around in their jets and kill anybody that disagrees with them. So that's really it. That's the first episode. I hope it was decent. I rambled. I talked fast. But that was an hour. That was a lot of information. I don't think everybody's going to get all those numbers. But I just needed to get that out. This episode was more for me than anybody else. But I'm going to try to start doing these a little more frequently. I'm going to do a little research before I do them. I'm not just going to come on and rant unless there's something to rant about. Even this recent strike by Trump, you can get 1 million views on it if on YouTube or CNN or anything. Everybody's got an opinion. I have one too. But I'd like to see the dust settle a little bit, and then maybe I'll do some backstory on Syria that you might not know or you might want to know, and just never really have the time to get into how we got to this point, how the official New York Times, CNN, Washington Post narrative is complete and utter bullshit and just propaganda that you're getting because you live in America, much like I'm sure the Russians get the Russian propaganda, and the truth is really in the middle somewhere. So that's it. I'm gonna, like I said, this will be. You'll find this on. I'm gonna tweet it out. I'll Facebook it out. But if you ever need to find it again, or you want to read some of the articles I've written, or find some of the links or the articles that I'm talking about here, you just go over to the website on WordPress. The link is on my Facebook. The link is on my Twitter. Voluntary Exchange Podcast blog. These will get better, I swear. But for now, that's it. Signing off. It's Mark Kiepa. Have a good night, everybody.